The Sirui Sniper looks like a Cine lens but behaves like a regular autofocus prime. And when I say it looks like a Cine lens, I'm not talking about the housing but the actual look or the character of the image. So hey there, in this video we're checking out the Sirui Sniper 23mm f1.2. Now this here is a fast autofocus prime that offers some insane amount of bokeh, subject separation and that sort of stuff. Something that's definitely helped this lens become somewhat of a legend among videographers shooting on APS-C or Super 35. And rightfully so, because it is a pretty remarkable lens in many ways. Even if there's no gears or any iris ring, the lens design is a bit different. We got an all-metal and carbon fiber housing, a nice big focus ring which actually feels surprisingly smooth and nice for a non-mechanical focus ring. No autofocus on or off switch, but we do get a tiny little USB-C port here at the mount for firmware updates. And a 58mm filter thread up here on the front. Now, the lenses do come with one of these little hoods, but for video shooters, I would recommend using a matte box if you're worried about flaring, veiling, that sort of stuff, which is actually something you can expect from this lens, at least if you're shooting backlit towards the sun. So if you're worried about your contrast levels, use the hood if you're a still shooter and a matte box if you're a videographer. And speaking of flaring, we can also see a couple of these colored flares, similar to what we see on the Nightwalker lenses. And I think it's pretty interesting, but once again, these can be tamed with hood or a matte box if you're a video shooter. Now, the autofocus feels pretty solid and quiet. I haven't heard it being picked up by any microphones, on or off camera microphones. It also supports object and eye tracking, which I think I showed you in my comparison video, where I also noticed that my A7 IV, which runs the latest firmware, handled autofocus much better than my FX30, which is still, if anyone wondering, on that 2.0 firmware. But the autofocus do look good. It's not the fastest or the snappiest autofocus I've seen, but I don't know, maybe that's intentional to make it a bit more human and less robotic and snappy. I don't know, but if we take a look at the focus breathing, there's not a whole lot to complain about here either. Now, let's look at some more samples shot with the A7 IV, where the autofocus once again will perform much better thanks to that newer firmware. The main difference here is going to be the responsiveness we're getting with that newer firmware. And while we're on the A7 IV, here's how the lens looks on a full-frame sensor. Quite a bit of vignetting, so definitely an APS-C lens. Now, who is this lens for? Well, I would say it's a great lens for any video shooters looking to move away from those ultra-sharp photography lenses and lean into something more intentional, a bit more narrative or cinematic, without giving up autofocus, obviously. So if you want to get away from that ultra-sharp broadcast look, then this lens might be the ticket for you. Now, before we take a look at some test shots, I just want to show you a bit more sample footage here shot with this lens. None of these looks soft to me, except for maybe one or two if I accidentally missed focus. And by the way, if you're wondering about bars on some of these shots, these are from a quick little test shoot I did the other day for an upcoming doc, which I'm planning on shooting on anamorphic lenses, so I wanted to slap some bars on there just to see what the aspect ratio would look like, since there's gonna be a lot of these fields and wide open planes and everything. But let's look at the test chart. So wide open at f1.2, we're sharp here in the middle, and we got a pretty significant fall off towards the edges. And we can still see some of that fall off even if we stop down. But as you've seen in real-world use, it kind of renders very differently from what it does on the test chart. And to quote cinematographer Greg Fraser once more, we're usually not making movies about test charts. Vignetting is going to be more noticeable wide open. Yeah, it'll improve as we stop down. Same thing when it comes to chromatic aberration, which is no surprise since we're dealing with a very affordable f1.2 lens. It's not going to be perfect, and we can see a tiny bit of color fringing here and there, especially in the specular highlights on these shots, but I bet you haven't noticed much or any chromatic aberration at all on the other sample footage that I've shown you so far. So I don't know, I think it's safe to say that chromatic aberration isn't gonna be a huge deal or a huge problem, especially not for video shooters where everything is gonna be moving around a bit most of the time. And after all, if this lens were to perform like a regular photography lens, it wouldn't be much point in getting it over something like the Viltrox 25mm f1.7, which I think is as close to perfection you can get in a budget lens. Now, we want something different from this lens, and that different comes with the whole package. I think the Sniper 23mm f1.2 offers something very different and unique, so if you want to explore a more cinematic lens but still have autofocus, I can't actually think of any other lens on the market that has all of these things going for it. It's also gonna be a great choice for all of you low-light event shooters or bokeh junkies out there with that f1.2 aperture. So in short, it's an interesting look, and I think it'll bring you a couple of steps closer to that full-frame look. Here's a super fast comparison with the Sony 35mm f1.8 and the Sirui 23mm, which is obviously a 35mm equivalent on APS-C. Now, thank you so much for watching. There's going to be some Robinhood links down below to all the available mount options for this lens, which is Sony E-mount, Fujifilm X, and Nikon Z. And I'll throw in a link to that matte box as well for those of you interested. But that's going to be it. I'll see you in the comment section. Thank you for watching. Goodbyes.